Hello student, today I am going to teach the topic hypervisor and its role. So let's proceed with the topic hypervisor and its role. As hypervisor plays an important role in the virtualization scenario by virtualization of hardware. It provides support for running multiple operating systems concurrently in virtual servers created within a physical servers. The virtualization layer is a software responsible for hosting and managing all virtual machines. The virtualization layer is a hypervisor running directly on the hardware. Example of some hypervisors are VMware, Xen, then kernel virtual manager. Now, this hypervisor carries very important role in the virtualization scenario. As an example, suppose you have one machine, one hardware resources or one CPU with you, and in that CPU you already install the Windows operating system, but doing certain R&D or use any kind of tool with different operating systems, you need to install that operating system which you want to use, like an Linux operating system, Ubuntu operating system, or any kind of Android based operating system or Mac OS. But here is a one limitation. What is the limitation? You have only one hardware resources, that is limited CPU machine with you, and on that CPU already you have installed the Windows operating system. So in that situation, if you want to use other operating system, so simply you need to remove the existing system, or you can run another system in a dual booting. But if you want to run 3 to 4 operating system, then it's become difficult. For that, every time you need to format and install a new operating system. So in that situation, what will be the solution? So solution is that we can go with the concept of virtualization. In this concept of virtualization, on a available resources with you, that is an single resources or limited resources, you can install a software that is called as a hypervisor, and with the help of that hypervisor you can virtually launch or virtually use different operating system, whether it's an various versions of Linux, Ubuntu, then it's an Android, Mac, or any other OS, and that is with the help of virtual mode. So now here problem is solved. You can launch, you can use, or you can deal with multiple operating system with an available resources. Means there is a one third party application that is called as hypervisor, which is going to deal with your system hardware. As shown in this picture, that hypervisor is going to deal with CPU, memory, network interface card, and the hard disk attached with that one. And with the help of that, in the virtualization mode, we can use different kinds of operating system. Now this is about the hypervisor. So when hypervisor is going to work in this way, then what are the different roles performed by that hypervisor? Let's have look on that roles. As hypervisor implementation approach, the one of the type that is a bare metal approach. So this type is called as a type 1 hypervisor. In this, these hypervisors runs directly on the system hardware, and it may require hardware assisted virtualization technology supported by CPU. Also, in this bare metal approach, limited set of hardware drivers provided by the hypervisor vendor. Example of such hypervisor vendors are Zen as well as VMware ESXi. Now in this approach, when you decided to implement the hypervisor, so this is a one kind of method where this hypervisor directly run on the system hardware, and important thing is that the CPU or the hardware resources which you have, that should be support for this virtualization technology. Then and then you can run properly this hypervisor, and with the help of this hypervisor we can create or we can launch number of virtual machine with the help of this hypervisor. So here in terms of role, some hypervisor is going to deal with the hardware resources, that is your CPU. Then the concept of using virtual machine increases the resource utilization in a cloud computing environment. Hypervisors are software tools used to create virtual machines, and they produce the virtualization of various hardware resources such as a CPU, storage, and networking devices. They are also called virtual machine monitor, that is a VMM. Mostly if you dealt with a data center concept, in a data center, number of VMM are working inside the data center, or also it is referred as a virtualization managers. VMM helps in the virtualization of cloud data center. The various hypervisors used such as a VMware, Zen hypervisor, Hyper-V, KVM, etc. There are number of vendors, they are having their own hypervisor from the Microsoft, then Zen, then VMware, also from the Oracle. Hypervisor helps to run multiple operating systems concurrently on a physical system and sharing its hardware. So, a hypervisor allows multiple operating systems to share a single hardware host. So, that is a important role of the hypervisor in terms of the sharing the multiple operating system to a single hardware host. Now, as we discussed the one of the approaches as a bare metal approach, like that we have another approach that is called as a hosted approach. So in this it is also called as a type 2 hypervisor. Now in this kind of hypervisor, it runs virtual machines on top of the host operating system, that is a Windows or Linux. Then it relies on host operating system for physical resource management, as host operating system provides drivers for communicating with the server hardware. Example as a virtual box, that is one of the hypervisor provided by the VMware. Now this is in terms of the hosted approach. As if you compare this hosted approach with an bare metal approach, so here you can found in terms of the role, as hypervisor cannot directly deal with the hardware. So whatever the host operating system installed on that CPU or on that machine, it can deal with that operating system, and after that whatever the required drivers for that hypervisor, and that has to be support or need to be organized this operating system, which is a great support to this hypervisor. And then afterwards you can launch number of virtual machines on that hypervisor. Basically there are number of users in this world, if they want to use the different operating system, they are going to use the hosted approach. But mostly if you are dealing with and data centers and all, so where they are going to use the bare metal kinds of approach. So everywhere their roles are different in terms of how they are going to interact with the hardware. As this is interact directly with the hardware in a bare metal approach, but in a hosted approach they are interact with the host operating system. Now in a different case, like an every OS appears to have the host processor, memory, and other resources allotted solely to it. However, the hypervisor is actually controlling the host processor and resources, and in turn allocates what is needed to each OS. So that is one of the important role performed by the hypervisor. As in this hosted approach, that is type 2 hypervisor, this kinds of hypervisor runs within a formal operating system environment. In this type, hypervisor runs as a distinct second layer, while the guest operating system as a third layer above the hardware. This is known as a hosted hypervisor. Examples like an VMware workstation as well as VirtualBox, they are falls under this category or this hosted approach type. Now, as examples given, it's an VMware ESXi. So it is one of the vendors in the market who is providing their own hypervisor, as it is going to follow the bare metal approach where they are going to implement the full virtualization approach. Also it is one of the latest technology which are mostly adapted in the data center. Also, it's used for secure and robust virtualization solution for virtual data centers and cloud infrastructure. Also, as a takes advantages of support for hardware assisted virtualization for 64-bit operating system on Intel processors. As you can see in this picture, this is a architecture of VMware ESXi, which is one of the bare metal kinds of hypervisor. That hypervisor directly dealt with the number of resources like an CPU, memory, then network interface card or your hard drives, and on that they are going to install number of operating system which virtually you want to launch or virtually you need to install. Within any data center, basically they will go with such bare metal approach, and as a their role point of view, this hypervisor will perform the role of an full virtualization, and it is providing the well support to this different virtualization environment as well as different operations of an data centers. Now this is the one of the vendor, that is a VMware. So like that we have Citrix, that is another example in this hypervisor. How the Citrix Zen server performing their role or how it is going to operating. Let's have a look on that. As it's an open source bare metal hypervisor, and it offers both hardware assisted virtualization, that is a HVM. In the language of virtualization environment, it is an HVM, and para virtualization. So HVM plus para virtualization, this role is performed by the Citrix Zen server. Also it needs virtualization support in the CPU from hardware assisted virtualization. Then Zen loads an initial operating system which runs as a privileged guest called as a domain 0. So when that hypervisor are directly installed on any CPU, with that there is a word domain operating systems running simultaneously on that hardware resources. The domain 0 operating system, typically a Linux or Unix variant, and can talk directly to the system hardware, whereas the other guest cannot and also talk directly to the hypervisor itself, and it allocates and the maps hardware resources for other guest domain, which is different from the installed guest operating system. So this is one kind of role performed by the Zen hypervisor. As we are studying the different vendors as well as how they are going to performing their role, or how their hypervisors are going to performing their different roles. As there is another hypervisor vendor whose name is Ubuntu. Their hypervisor is a KVM, that is kernel based virtual machine. Nowadays it's much more popular because it's an open source. You can get it easily available from internet or from the cloud. Then it's an kernel level extension to the Linux, and which is going to perform the role of the full virtualization. As in terms of full virtualization, it uses a special kind of software called as a hypervisor, that is in terms of KVM. The hypervisor interact directly with the physical servers hardware resources such as a CPU, we can say, then storage space, and act as a platform for the virtual server operating system. Also, such kinds of hypervisors perform roles in terms of to keep each virtual server completely independent and unaware of the other virtual servers running on the physical machine. Here, in this, each guest server or the virtual machine is able to run its own operating system. So that is one of the benefits you will get it if you install and use the Ubuntu kernel based virtual machine. Here it's an open source. As shown in the picture, it's for the Linux application, and as the this KVM is directly installed on the aware, the KVM is going to deal with number of Linux mints and Linux operating system which are open source, and on that, if there is any kind of Linux application, that also you can run on this virtual machine hypervisor. So this is about the KVM. As we discussed, the hypervisor allows multiple operating systems to share a single hardware host. So, in such a scenario, every operating system appears to have the host processor, memory, and other resources allotted solely to it. However, the hypervisor is actually controlling the host processor and resources, and in turn allocates what is needed to each operating system. Also, as a role point of view, the hypervisor makes sure that the guest operating system, which you can call as a virtual machines, do not interrupt each other. In virtualization technology, hypervisor manages multiple operating systems or multiple instances of same operating system on a single physical computer system. Also, as one of the role as a hypervisors are designed to suit a specific processor, and they are also called virtualization manager. As we learn, it is called as a VMM, virtual machine manager, as it is going to support for the two kinds of hypervisor, type 1 and type 2. In type 1, such kinds of hypervisor runs directly on host computers hardware in order to control the hardware resources and also to manage the guest OS. And in terms of type 2, as their role changes, this types of hypervisor runs within a formal operating system environment. So such kinds of hypervisor runs as a distinct second layer, while the guest OS runs as a third layer above the hardware. So this is about the role performed by the hypervisor. Thank you.